Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and program stream at windowsontheworld.net. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Windows on the World. We had a great day down in Hayling Island yesterday. Quite encouraging to see that there's some people there who want to actually get up and do something. Bit like last week in Frome. We'll have to see how it all goes, though. There seems to be little cells of people all over the country who are now ready to take on what's happening locally. Yes, the policies which are enslaving you. No, it's not a conspiracy theory. We've been talking about it for years. Your local council is out of control, but more importantly, we are surviving brain-dead Britain, and it is time to declare a thinking emergency. Yes, we were in Hayling Island yesterday, and we had an interesting talk. There's some people who turned up there who are now taking matters into their own hands, seem to be doing some quite good work. So I'm going to be talking to people more about this over the next few weeks, because it's now time for some decisive action, and that means action against the people who are imposing policies which are incredibly unpopular, which are going to enslave you and indeed future generations. These are the so-called useful idiots the Soviets talked about, and yes, they're in your local council, because remember, the actual agendas that are being imposed with regeneration, building hundreds of houses on your doorstep and getting you into smart cities, getting you surveilled, getting you out of your cars, are all global policies implemented at a local level by your local council, which is indeed what we talk about in our series of talks. I'm available for talks through windowsontheworld.net, and we also have Sandy Adams and Piers Corbyn, who are part of a team which we take around. Now, in the future, we're going to be doing bigger venues with the three of us and individually smaller venues. So if you want to book myself for a talk, which is a comprehensive talk on all that we talk about in the shows and everything that's going on locally and globally, get in touch through windowsontheworld.net. So yes, we're in Worthing next Saturday. Next Saturday we're in Worthing. Please go to windowsontheworld.net and register your interest on Eventbrite. We need as many there as possible because, as I said at the beginning, small cells of people are forming. We're not going to talk about this too much on air, but there is work going on behind the scenes. And in light of what happened recently in Fairborn, Gwynedd, North Wales, when a local newspaper incited a protest which never happened, and then the local Labour Party decided to use ad hominem attacks against me, none of it really works. We're going to be talking a bit about that tonight as well, in the respect that the people who attack anyone outside this controlled narrative of climate change and communitarianism, which is what it is. Communitarianism came out of the late 1800s. John Barmby, who was actually a communist, so communitarian. New stuff is on the website. I'm starting to put new posts on the website, and I'm starting to collate several shows together with a post. So we've got some really good ones on there. One about communitarianism. We've got several new articles, and there's got to be an article put up all about the CO2 in the atmosphere, which you'll find very useful to use against the alarmists, those people who are trying to take away your freedoms on the back of a big lie. No, it's not a conspiracy theory, and Elvis doesn't live on the dark side of the moon. The ad hominem attacks and the logical fallacies, though, still keep coming. Yeah, get attacked by those all the time. But in a way, what this is about is catastrophism versus uniformitarianism, because the people who are actually imposing the climate change agenda aren't even catastrophists, because if they were, they would know that huge upheavals have happened in the history of the Earth, and basically extinctions have happened before. Mass extinctions have actually happened before. But the view of the climate change lobbyists is that these huge impacts like comets, etc., and real catastrophes are secondary to 4% of CO2 in the atmosphere. It's 0.04%, and 4% of that is what we're alleged to create. So they're saying that that is a catastrophe. Well, no, that's uniformitarianism in the respect that all they're doing is backing up a corporate narrative. So yes, it says here, I've just pulled out this today, get onto our first news item. Coronavirus, UK police to round up anyone suspected to be infected for quarantine. Health bosses warned the infection is a serious and imminent danger to the UK as they closed down a GP's surgery in Brighton. Police have been granted unprecedented new powers. This has been reported by several newspapers, including The Sun and the Daily Telegraph. So police have been granted unprecedented new powers. Now that is quite worrying because it would indicate that they're going to use this to bring in some kind of legislation. We've already got very draconian legislation in this country, and as far as I'm concerned, the corruption that goes on in this country is worse than most other countries. So once you start giving these people in the police all this power, then what can possibly go wrong? Well, that's the problem, isn't it? Giving them all tasers is bad enough, but giving them unrestricted power is another thing. Health chiefs had to close down a GP practice in the South Coast in Brighton as it's feared to be at the centre of the outbreak which started in China. As the new cases were announced, the County Oak Medical Centre in Brighton closed its doors because of an urgent operational health and safety reason, it said. People wearing protective full-body suits and gloves were seen cleaning the centre in footage shared online on Monday. We're talking here about a chest infection which can cause pneumonia. So it's not exactly uncommon, this virus, but apparently these strains can become virulent. But I haven't gone into talking about this too much, as I said at the beginning of the show, because it's very difficult to get unsensationalized material. I've been sent some stuff, but I can't actually guarantee the validity of everything I've been sent. It says here, it comes as the coronavirus death toll has hit 1,000 and more than 43,000 people have been infected worldwide. Draconian new powers authorising police to arrest anyone suspected of being infected with coronavirus were imposed on Monday after a patient tried to break out of a quarantine unit. Now, this is a bit strange, and you have to take these stories not at face value, but what they're actually trying to say, what they're trying to do here. Did someone really try and break out? Was it dramatic, or did they just try and leave and they said, well, you can't because you're going to infect people? And it says here, officers potentially wearing protective hazmat suits will have power to enter any place and use reasonable force to seize people who have returned from an infected area and have not agreed to be isolated. Now, this is very vague because return from an infected area, that can be anywhere that they designate as being infected, because it's all done on the back of what they believe. So if they believe it to be infected, and that's their excuse, then they can do this anywhere. So this is something to be concerned about. They could also forcibly round up any potential carriers of the virus who leave one of England's 2 isolation facilities without permission. Anyone who fails to comply could face arrest and a fine of up to £1,000. Emergency legislation was signed before dawn by Health Secretary Matt Hancock after the reported after the reported breakout bid from Arrow Park Hospital in the Wirral. A reported breakout bid? It all sounds rather dramatic, doesn't it? Dubbed Camp Corona. A staff accommodation block is being used to house 93 people. So let's go to China now. And it says, in most publications, I think this is actually from The Sun, so that's a very reliable source. But remember, all of them get their information from Reuters and Associated Press, so it's the same story in every paper, really. It says, with full martial law and now wartime measures. Here is how the lockdown began, as home to apartment buildings to full city blocks. The net of starvation, lack of medical help and death expands, and new laws will not even allow people out to buy food. How many will starve? How many are really sick? This is how it's done in large cities. So, this is quite interesting. I was talking to people around the world over the last week or so and have been collating a bit of data. I have had reports that in this area of China, Wuhan, that people are being sort of locked inside, and there is some disturbing videos available. There are some disturbing videos coming out of there. Again, it's very difficult. We need to get real good sources for this material. He says, I think it won't happen in the US. This is actually, wait a minute. That's not this is from I think this is from the New York Times, this one. It's the same story, though. It's actually the same story in the Sun. So basically, yes, it's all the same thing. It says, think it won't happen in the US, or the UK. Well, it's happening, isn't it? CDC February 15th gave orders to begin screening anyone with flu-like symptoms in capital cities across the US, and you can now be forcibly quarantined. So this is global, and I've been looking at the level 6 pandemic from the World Health Organization. And that's basically all about absolute constant surveillance in real time. But we've got to remember that this goes back to 2008, 2009, because they haven't declared a pandemic since then. It says here, first closures began with all transportation, then bridges, followed by highways and tunnels. After that, 4 corner intersections, then roads connecting villages. Now, full dominance and transport corridors. Now, this is very interesting because this ties into what we talk about, which is the Agenda 21, Agenda 2030 policies for quarantining mass population all over the world. No, it's not a conspiracy theory, folks. They're called corridors. And these are places where you're allowed to travel, and they have corridors which are between places in America, because obviously America's a lot bigger, but here they're doing the same thing, and they're closing off a lot of land and pushing people into smart cities. This is what the UN Agenda 2030 plans are all about facilitating. So it all kind of dovetails together, doesn't it? The smart cities and cutting off of land, which effectively quarantine areas, would mean that this is much quicker to achieve than most of the populations are in cities, you see. So basically, the way they're doing it with this idea of quarantine ties directly into how the smart city grid is going to work. And of course, Wuhan in China is alleged to be a bit of a smart city. So it says, what is phase 6? This is phase 6 of a level 6 pandemic. Now, we've got to remember that in 2008, 2009, I think there was less people infected than this time. So they haven't actually called it a pandemic yet, which is interesting, but they've given powers which would indicate that it is a pandemic. So there's something a bit contradictory going on here. I'll have to look into it a bit more, but the World Health Organization doesn't seem to have actually announced a pandemic yet. I know a pandemic's meant to be worldwide. I'm not that silly, but the point is that they did it last time, and there was very few people infected in very few countries with this H1N1. So this is interesting, because it was said it was last updated on the 11th of June 2009. So let's see what it said about phase 6, level 6, and a pandemic. What phase 6 is a pandemic, according to the WHO definition. The World Health Organization pandemic phase descriptions. It says here, pandemic, influenza, preparedness and response. What about severity? The severity of it says, at this time, and this was in 2009, the World Health Organization considers the overall severity of the influenza pandemic to be moderate. This assessment was based on scientific evidence available to the World Health Organization, as well as input from its member states on the pandemic's impact on their health systems and their social and economic functioning. A previous WHO pandemic was announced during the bird flu outbreak, but it was in no way a pandemic. The forcible removal of those into quarantine centres thought to be infected was part of this level 6 preparedness, so that's important, right? Level 6, remember, also, was never actually officially rescinded, which I thought was very, very odd. So they declared a pandemic but never rescinded it. So that's still on the World Health Organization website there. So with a focus on Wuhan and this tying into the UN Agenda 2030 plans, this could be rolled out in any smart city and all roads closed and lockdown achieved using the Internet of Things, controlling all sources very effectively using the smart grid. Now, the focus on depopulating coastal areas appears to be in many places around Britain and, of course, the world. We're going to get onto that next. This depopulating of coastal areas, of course, we were in Fairborn, which is in Gwynedd in North Wales, which is threatened with decommissioning. In other words, you can't get your property insured because of the predicted rising sea levels, which we said will not rise, and also this Another thing that isn't taken into consideration, which is land accretion. That means where the land is actually rising. So none of this is actually freely available. It's the projections of the sea level rise which is available, but not the actual accretion of land, that's an interesting point. So it's basically very selective, this information. It's very selective what they put out. So I think that this whole idea of coastal depopulation, being down in Hayling Island, was quite interesting because we were staying down there just on the coast, and it's been announced that it's very, very difficult now to park up and camp there. You're not allowed to. So that's dissuaded a lot of people coming down for the weekend. So all the local businesses are suffering. There's a lot of this draconian stuff going on. And if you've got it in your area, do let us know. And also you start lobbying your councils, because this is the only way you're going to do it. And you need small groups of people who are unaffiliated with no name. There has to be no name to the group, no designated leader. The leader has to be kept out of the way. The leader should be hidden. Let's take a little detour here, because I wanted to talk about this, and that's what these radio shows are about, really. We can go off on tangents here and there. But yes, the thing is that if you've got, say, 12 people, this is the old Rosicrucian method. You put 12 of the Brotherhood out front in the public, and the 13th, the real power, is hidden. The person who's actually carrying things out and needs to be hidden is hidden by the other 12. And this is like the idea of snooker balls. Basically, you've got this, the last one in the triangle cannot be seen because it's covered on pretty much all sides. That's the idea of it all. And that's how the so-called elite operate their system. So, in other words, what needs to happen is that the public need to start studying the way this is rolled out. In other words, it's done by consensus. It looks as though you agree. Well, you didn't agree, because they have useful idiots up there who are put into citizens' assemblies and are steered into a predetermined outcome. And we're going to get onto that tonight as well, because this is where it starts to all tie in. But yes, the focus on depopulating coastal areas. This is very, very interesting stuff, because this is where the depopulation is going to start. Of course, along with the rewilding, pushing people into cities and getting farmers to stop farming, to stop putting animals on their land, and to rewild their land, which makes it absolutely useless. And also, rewilding is not good for land. It's not good for land to be unmanaged. Land husbandry is what actually keeps the land in shape. Some people take issue on that, because a lot of these people who are into rewilding live in cities, and everyone's going to live in cities, aren't they? That's the whole point. So the war on farmers and the use of land is something we have covered, and are all part of the plans that we are talking about pretty much on and off every week. We do take some detours into other areas like history, and we're going to do more of that. This is another point I wanted to bring up as a side issue. Our weekly broadcasts, which are on YouTube, 8 p.m. on a Wednesday, are going to be featuring some pretty remarkable stories over the next few weeks. I'm starting to tie that all down, because we've had about 4 or 5 weeks of doing them now, and they've been going very well. They've established themselves. Now it's time to move on, get focused, and start really putting out very concentrated information on those shows. And this is what I was saying at the talks on Saturday. I don't intend to go around sort of keep repeating the same thing to a group of people who may know most of what I'm talking about and applaud in all the right places. That's not the intention. The intention is to get groups of the public who actually want to do something about it. Once you start up a movement, however, you will be targeted and taken down. Remember, this is not a democratic country. As Demos, the UK government think tank who were instructed by MI5, stated several years ago, the new democracy will work with a combination of government open infiltration and citizens' groups taking direct action. Government open infiltration. Agents of the state trained into the principles and agenda of the hive mind. In other words, you're either with us or you're not. You're with us or you're with the terrorists. No one will be left behind, according to the UN Global Action Plan. Anyone wanting to drive a car more than 100 miles, forget it, because you're going to have an electric one, which you've got to plug in, and you can't really go anywhere. So this is quite interesting. And yeah, we've been talking about this in the shows, and I intend to get groups of people up and down the country to get in touch with me who are actually doing something. Time for talking is over, and I don't want to be doing these talks going round looking very worthy and getting very animated and talking about it, which I do enjoy. I enjoy it a lot, actually. I enjoy getting up and talking, and I get quite energised by it. But what I get energised by most of all is the response. In other words, well, we're doing this and we're going to go for them and we're going to take this down and we're going to do this properly. Not that I'm going to go to a council meeting and see what they have to say. We're beyond that point now. Council meetings are held using Delphi technique, which was invented by the Rand Corporation in 1953. It's a way of gaining what they call group consensus. In other words, you're steered into a predetermined outcome, which is what the citizens' assemblies are all about. They're getting the public to agree to things that they would never normally agree to, like, for instance, retrofitting their houses at £25,000 each for the CO2 that they've given out in the past. That's what your energy performance certificate was for. You know, those useless certificates that gave you a band A to F. Well, the poorest people are the ones who will suffer because the ones in the lower bands are the ones who can't afford to have double glazing. They certainly can't afford to give their local council £25,000. So, cells of affected people, that's the coronavirus, isn't it? Cells of effective people are needed all over the country to take on those who are imposing huge numbers of high density housing areas and stripping away the communal infrastructure. The country is being re-engineered rapidly. The taking away of all rights is not complicated, and indeed, they've just announced it through this virus. It's all done quite easily and becoming more and more obvious. This is a focus we need of some very organised people, and it is something that we will keep in touch with over the next few weeks. So if you've got a cell of 2 or 3 people or even more, maybe cells of people working together under an umbrella is a good idea, but never form a group. All groups in this country are taken over and infiltrated. Well, Demos just told you, didn't they? That's a public policy think tank, and that's all for the common good. That's for your well-being. It's for the financing and the national security of the asset, which is the United Kingdom. However, problem we've got now is the Western democracies are being brought down by organisations like Extinction Rebellion because they're getting their people to lobby the government for these citizens' assemblies, which are absolutely the end of democracy. Take a look at our latest article on citizens' assemblies at windowsontheworld.net. You'll see 3 or 4 shows on that, and it will be explained what it is. Also have a look at an article about communitarianism, which you'll find in the articles section at windowsontheworld.net. I'm starting to put up some of the previous shows as well in little groups in the latest archive of shows, because mostly our shows are available on Spreaker, which is in the live page of Windows on the World, and it's linked to the home page. Everything's there, and our archive on YouTube is all there. Our whole video archive is very, very important in a way because it goes back to about 2014, 2015, and previous to that even. But the point is that some of those shows are very important as to what's going on. None of this stuff really goes out of date that we put out. We did some stuff on housing years ago when we were at a little venue in North London, and those are still very valid because all of the stuff that we talked about in those housing shows is what's being imposed now on you. So in other words, the rollout has just got bigger. So yes, a focus of organised people is what is needed. And it's something that we will definitely keep going on the shows and keep in touch with us about it. The strategies needed to deal with these change agents, these agents of change, and basically paid liars, has to be to expose the tactics that they're using, which is basically making it look as though everyone's agreeing. Now, it's not very effective what they do, but it's effective only in the respect that the public don't challenge it. That's why it's effective, because it's assumed that the public agree. And the whole idea is to create groups with no name and no apparent leaders, because leaders are taken down quickly. That's the first thing that happens. Now, a few years ago, there was an organisation that was challenging a government organisation around the country. They had a few agents, really. They had a few people, and they couldn't be infiltrated because everybody has to have a case history and everybody had to tell you what they were there for. And if you've got a group that's got a single aim, then it cannot be subverted by the likes of what we was talking about the other week with John Kitson. I went on the 5G awareness. We're talking about this world shift, which has now taken its website down because we actually exposed that they exposed themselves. They are part of the Club of Rome. They're the Club of Budapest. The Club of Rome is an elite think tank which invented global warming. You don't believe me? Have a look what it says in the first global revolution. In the absence of enemies, such as famine, war, and the like, we decided that climate change would fit the bill. The enemy of humanity is humanity itself. That's paraphrased, but that's a direct quote from what they said. So all of this is a bit of social engineering, really. So the whole idea is to create groups with no name, no apparent leaders. It's like the pathetic attacks on me from this newspaper, the Cambrian News in Wales, when we went to Fairborn, which is threatened with this decommissioning. We wanted to tell them the good news that the world's leading expert in sea levels would actually represent them in court. And what they did was they did a hit piece on me. All stupid ad hominem childish stuff, but you can find that on windowsontheworld.net in the articles. Go to... It's called Welsh Labour Party Disgrace, and there's another one called Welsh News Fail, I think it's called. I put them up last week. I've been putting a lot of stuff up there, so do have a look on the website. So yeah, these attacks on myself and this Cambrian News, they attempted to incite a protest against our talks in Fairborn. And of course the Welsh Labour Party did the same thing, but they'd use these childish ad hominems. Now, the thing is, you see, that when people attack Windows on the World, our response to that is there forever. So whenever they Google themselves, unless Google block it, it's there. So they can see it. And that's the way to deal with all these people. Name and shame. Because this is the big thing that's happening now. I don't know if you noticed, but in these local papers like the Live series, which is produced by Reach PLC, they're demonising businesses. Now, there may be a good reason behind this, but this is what these local council newspapers were doing. Like, if your business was putting out their rubbish on the wrong day, you'd be named and shamed. Now, I actually brought down that newspaper that was doing that in Waltham Forest, got them to take it all down. Because a lot of the time they're acting outside the law and not really in the public interest. They're acting in the common good, which means the communitarian hive mind, keep everyone in their place and make it look as though they all agree. But that's not really the public interest, you see, two different things. The real public interest I'm talking about, not the one that they talk about on the television, either way. So, yeah, when propaganda fails, it is because it is not effective. Now, that's highly important to what we're talking about here. Propaganda fails because it is not effective. In other words, you can't keep repeating the same old rubbish. Even Saul Alinsky, in his Rules for Radicals, which is the template Bible for a lot of these so-called change agents and future leaders and these idiots that you see on television from lobbying groups. You know those television programs where they're meant to be members of the public, where they're there because they're from a diversity background or they're pushing some lobbying agenda, which is what they're all doing. It's all about political discourse. It's got nothing to do with public engagement. So, yeah, how many times can they say, I suppose you think Elvis is alive and well and living on the dark side of the moon? In response to a fact. You know those things that we used to see, and we used to see them even on television. Facts. Remember those? Well, we are in the post-truth world, you see. That was the Guardian phrase of the year. Actually, they said word of the year. Well, actually, it's not. It's two words, isn't it? Post-truth. That aren't necessarily part of each other. So yeah, well, that's the Guardian. And we do actually use them as an example of state propaganda at its absolute banal and worst. But the narrative on television is aimed at a very unsophisticated audience. Those who watch TV are bombarded with side issues of no importance whatsoever. The real issues are never addressed and there's no clarity. I was watching, something was on the television this morning. I was at someone's house and it was on in the background and it was that Nicky Campbell, that pathetic fawning idiot who has those so-called talk shows where they have an interactive talk, which is all lobbyists. These people are all from lobbying organisations. And they're given their predetermined nonsense to spout. And they were talking about, is UK's immigration policy shameful? Well, which part of the policy are you saying is shameful? Which part of it are you singling out? Which examples are you giving of case studies where something shameful has happened? Nothing to do with any of that, of course. The real issue is not addressed. It's all about lobbyists bringing up their diversity quotas. Absolutely pathetic. Nothing is said on television at all. And when you don't watch it for a while, you notice it, you turn it on, so they're not saying anything. Now back to the studio. Yeah, okay. But what happened? Nothing. So this is where the weakness is, I think, in the actual fact that the propaganda level of, say, it's the climate change brainwashing and this communitarian hive mind consensus is at the level of an immature 10-year-old child. You look at television, and I don't want to insult 10-year-olds here because a lot of them are very bright, but the point is that television is actually aimed at sort of pre-secondary school mentality. There's nothing on there. They don't say anything. There is no one on TV who actually has an argument about anything, and which is an argument and which has clarity and is actually effective. So they have very muddled thinking, and they always use side issues, and they never get to a point. This is extremely important with dealing with these people in councils. They never get to a point. You have to make sure that you force them into taking down points and responding to them. And I think groups of people can do this because they're terrified of the public, because they're all lying all the time. It's not a conspiracy theory, it's true that, you know. So, yeah, academics as well are a big problem because they just merely repeat the party line and they're lost outside of it because they reinforce the state narrative. The state narrative reinforces them. Let's get on to something else. The climate of fear and control. Your council is next. This is from the Oxford Mail. Oxford, of course, was where they had the first Citizens' Assembly on climate change. They've now got their useful idiot who inflicted all the road closures and the Agenda 21 policies in Walthamstow. Clyde Lokes is now the useful idiot who's re-engineering Oxford, or helping to. Oxford City Council, this is from the Oxford Mail. Oxford City Council has revealed its £19 million plan to respond to the recommendations made by this summer's Citizens' Assembly on climate change. OK, Citizens' Assembly on climate change was led by a group of lobbyists. You couldn't question anthropogenic global warming. It was a given. They gave you over a couple of days. They taught you about climate change. Now, they taught you about climate change, did they? That's interesting because if you want to know about the climate systems on the Earth, if you studied it for 50 years, you would still not be able to say with complete confidence that you knew enough about those systems to actually predict them with any level of accuracy over long term. You can make generalizations, yes, but the intricacies of the weather systems are complex. The intricacies of how everything interacts is complex. This is where these academics and lobbyists don't understand the complexity of the nature of the universe because they're uniformitarianists. They believe that things just go on normally and then all of a sudden we're having this huge effect on the climate. Well, no, that's not the way it's been. The catastrophists and even people like Velikovsky, who wrote Worlds in Collision, which was all about this asteroid belt created by a collision with the Earth. We'll look into it. We haven't got time to that now. But these people were derided at the time, but then their information was found to be true, like Velikovsky getting the surface temperature on Venus correct and all this kind of thing. Interesting stuff. But we have to remember that academia always rejects things which become fact. Always. And the consensus reality has made that even worse. So you've got people now who are lobbyists steering the public into things that the public wouldn't normally agree to, retrofitting their houses for £25,000, getting rid of their cars, locking themselves into smart cities, being surveilled 24 hours a day, talking about green but not knowing what it means. So it says, Oxford City Council has revealed its £19 million plan. Now, this is interesting because Wandsworth have just explained they've got 20 million. Now, where's it coming from? Well, actually, some of it's private because the thing is about this is it's making money. The climate change agenda is about money. It's a business, environmental and development. So you've got sustainable development is a mixture of environmentalism on one hand and development on the other. The banks are the development side of it. And I can play you something now, which I've played before, which I think would be a nice little break, actually. Listen to what David Lang, a Montreal international banker, had to say in 1992 at the UNCED conference, the Rio Earth Summit of 1992, where all of this went into 178 countries agreeing to it. So the beginning of your citizens' assemblies was that conference. And what sustainable development is an easy term for the public, which basically gives them something that sounds good, and it appeals to their simplistic interpretations, and it can be rolled out simplistically. This is what David Lang had to say about the public, the Montreal.
I suggest, therefore, that this be sold not through a democratic process. That would take too long and devour far too much of the funds to educate the cannon fodder, unfortunately, which populates the earth. We have to take almost an elitist program that we can see beyond our swollen bellies and look to the future in time frames and in results which are not easily understood or which can be, with intellectual honesty, be reduced down to some kind of simplistic definition.
Okay, so that's what the elite think of the public, you see. And the whole of the environmental agenda was thought up by an oil billionaire and a person who was an international businessman who ended up in China, convicted criminal actually, called Maurice Strong, very interesting fellow, look him up, and Edmund de Rothschild and a few others. So basically, all that's happening in your local area is being run by banks. So have a think about that. It might give people another perspective on what green really is. The environmentalists are the water, the banks are the fire, as defined by Edmund de Rothschild in 1992. Oxford City Council and its 90 million plan, let's get into it, as well as helping fund some 400 new electric vehicle charging points around the city, the council will also be supporting and incentivising private taxi firms to go green. Their chosen partners will be those who are putting in these electric vehicles. So self-employed taxi drivers are a thing of the past if you are in Oxford. All city council housing will be reviewed. Old-fashioned, inefficient equipment torn out and new eco-friendly upgrades made. In other words, smart meters rolled out on the back of this pathetic hoodwinking of the public called a citizens' assembly. Community buildings will be similarly retrofitted, and all new build homes will be required to meet higher standards. The plans are all based on the recommendations of the 42 Citizens' Assembly members who sat through 2 weekends of expert talks. No, they didn't. They were not experts. Their climate expert was Miles Allen, a climate modeller from Oxford University. What's a climate modeller? A climate modeller is someone who predicts what the IPCC want. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, who he works for, are not a scientific organisation. They are a lobbying group of the United Nations and was set up in 1998 to prove that anthropogenic global warming was happening and was real. It has no other function apart from that. It's not a scientific body, never has been, never will be. So that's interesting. So he was their expert witness, and he actually misdirected a court in Los Angeles. Look up climate trial fiasco gets bloody nose. And he was the expert witness who basically misrepresented the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, was being rebuked by a judge, also lied with his temperature data. So you've got a proven liar who's your expert. I think that might need addressing by the people of Oxford. Who's got the guts to go and say your climate expert is a liar, a proven liar who misrepresented and misdirected a court, is a disgrace, and we now demand another citizens' assembly with us. We're the real citizens, and guess what? There's 1,000 of us, and we all require you to act accordingly. What would happen then? Ooh, they'd get scared, wouldn't they? Wouldn't that be fun? I'm not encouraging you to do anything illegal here. I'm encouraging you to take action, which is your right of public engagement. And you're an unaffiliated group of local residents concerned about the lack of democratic process in local government planning and policy. And you will remain unaffiliated as individuals acting collectively and within the law towards a truly inclusive democratic process where all voices are heard. That's part of our manifesto that I wrote up. And you can do your own too. Very good idea. I'll read it out at the end of the show. I'm certainly going to put it on the website. We've had it in a few articles, actually. A few people use it. But basically, it safeguards you against the attacks of these pathetic people in your local council who call you a conspiracy theorist, or you're a right-wing conspiracy theorist, or you're a right-wing supremacist, or something like that because you voted Brexit, that sort of thing. You know, these retarded arguments, these retarded people give you in Braindead Britain. It says the investment will be made up to £1 million of operational funding, so that's going to the council, and £18 million in capital investment. That's interesting. That needs to be looked into as to who is investing in this. Where's the money coming from? Is it coming from the Cabinet Office? No, it's coming from private investors who've got a vested interest with those nose in the trough, lazy council employees who are all lobbyists for an agenda which is against your interest. Wouldn't you think that would be a good reason for thousands of people to start withholding their council tax until they reinstate democracy? Have a think about that. Sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? In addition to the £19 million promise, the City Council will also commit to reach net zero emissions by 2020. Getting closer. Next year, this year, in 2020. I thought it was 2030. Wait a minute. This is getting serious, folks. The City Council will also commit to reach net zero emissions in 2020. So, there you go. The people who voted for this should be ashamed of themselves. Literally ashamed of themselves. And plans to hold a zero-carbon Oxford Summit in the new year, where organisations responsible for large amounts of pollution will be invited to try to lower the city's carbon output. Demonise small businesses unless they go along with the retrofitting of their premises, with the taxation, with getting rid of their vehicles, all the rest of it. So all of those people, the tradesmen in your local area, they are all going to be put out of business unless they're part of big business. That's what this is about. Remember, this is a corporate agenda. It's nothing to do with the climate. Nothing personal. It's just business. So, yeah, this is what the Global Environmental Facility was all about in 1987. It was set up at the World Wilderness Conference. And that was Maurice Strong, again, the oil billionaire, who started climate change along with the elite think tank, the Club of Rome. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's all in a 42-chapter document called Agenda 21 and the Biodiversity Assessment of 1995, which basically tells you, or told you, what was going to happen now. And it is happening now, isn't it? The proposals in the new climate emergency budget include raising the energy efficiency of new homes and community buildings, cutting transport emissions, boosting renewable energy, expanding biodiversity, and increasing public engagement with recycling. In other words, micromanaging your every move. Surveillance, surveillance, surveillance. Councillor Tom Hayes said, "The measures we are proposing are bold and significant in the context of the City Council's budget and reach." Nice little word salad there, Tom, you useful idiot. Soundbite is typical of those working against the public interest and should be ridiculed into retreat, so please start working on this one straight away. "We are setting a new course, taking the city towards zero carbon," Tom Hayes said, "while ensuring this does not sacrifice residents' living standards." Why did you put that in? I wonder why you put that in, because you know you have. Or disadvantaged low-income households, which you're going to do. It affects the poorest people, you useful idiot. Well, it's based on a flawed premise, you see, and it does disadvantage the poorest and the most vulnerable. So he's a liar. He probably doesn't even know he's a liar, but he hasn't got much going on in his highly inactive and minuscule brain, because he just gave us a word salad that he's been told to repeat. Make sure you seize the moral high ground and hold on to it when dealing with these mental midgets. Oxford City Council was the first local authority in the UK to call a citizens' assembly. Those 42 people should be absolutely ashamed of themselves. Name and shame them, who was on that citizens' assembly. What have you voted for? Sheared into shameful stupidity. Look at our article, windowsontheworld.net, Citizens' Assemblies End of Choice. Earlier this year, it says market research company Ipsos Mori was commissioned to recruit 50 Oxford residents as representatives to learn about climate change. Learn about climate change, what, from someone who lied in court? And lobbyists for the climate change agenda who make money out of it, who get paid for going. So these are your experts, are they? Lobbyists, you're experts. Well, that makes sense. It is a business after all. And explore different options on how to cut carbon emissions. To be indoctrinated, basically, into the IPCC narratives by lobbyists and barefaced liars. During September and October, they gathered to consider new carbon targets and additional measures to reduce emissions, which they released in a summary report in November, which I've had a look at. The key proposal, backed by almost all members of the Assembly who felt that rapid action is required, was that Oxford should achieve net zero emissions sooner than 2050. Well, they're already trying to tell you that they want it all done this year. Basically, that's what they're saying. So expect things to get really bad in Oxford. Who put that into their highly inactive and minuscule brains, I wonder? Well, it couldn't be anything to do with the UN Global Action Plan, Sustainable Development. No, that's a conspiracy theory, isn't it? The likes of those who are rolling it out, like Clyde Lokes, who said to me that the Agenda 21 conspiracy theory of a takeover of the world was a conspiracy theory. Well, I told him it's a 42-chapter document, and which part of it would he discuss with me, because he's been implementing it for the last 10 years in Walthamstow, North East London. Now he's doing it in Oxford. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, those of you who are interested in these minutiae of detail, he's a common purpose graduate. Common purpose is basically they train the future leaders, but along with lots of others. Look at Crown Agents. Look up Crown Agents and see what they do. Look up Unlimited and see what they do. Look up BBC Media Action and see what they do. They subvert democracy all around the world. And I thought people were paying them because they're a public interest broadcasting network. No, they're not a public interest broadcasting network. That's why Nazanin Ratcliffe was locked up in Iran. She was training so-called journalists or change agents out there, which were they doing in every country in the world, getting people to go along with their fake BBC narrative. Okay, that bit's kind of dealt with. It says, let's get back to this. While the City Council is still unsure what its new commitment will be, really, it addressed other recommendations from the report. Well, their commitments will be whatever the Global Governance Summit recommend. Global Governance Summit was held last year in Dubai. And this year we've got the Wilderness 11 conference in March in Jaipur in India. That followed on from these other conferences. Yeah, the 1987 one. The World Wilderness Conference was the first one where they set up that global environmental facility, which is what's going to be behind the looting of assets. And remember, this is all about a business plan. Let's see what else it says. Another major polluter is the transport sector. Changes proposed will include supporting electric vehicle take-up and charging infrastructure, supporting electric buses and taxis, lobbying for a vehicle standards and scrappage scheme, and investment in cycling. Whatever next? 40-foot pavements and cycle lanes. I wonder where I've seen that before. Well, every city and town in the country. Lobbying for vehicle standards scrappage scheme. In other words, white van man is going into mass extinction. So, all older vehicles to go and the self-employed annihilated unless they are part of the hive mind agenda, unless they're lobbyists for it. That's what communitarianism is all about. Progress, it says, in reaching net zero carbon emissions will be measured at 5-year intervals. The authority has also said that every aspect of the Council's work will be approached with the climate emergency in mind in the future. Now, this is interesting. Somebody came to our meeting in Frome, a chap called Roy, who's an architect, and he gave me something which was for a planning application, and it was for some farm buildings, historic farm buildings, to be renovated. He also told me that in order to even start doing this, when you've got some land now, and I'm generalising here because I need more information, okay? So if you've got more information, do send this in. I'm trying to find more at the moment. This is important. This is how they're going to get people out of the countryside. Basically, it was for repairs and alterations to a house and historic farm buildings, including reinstatement of recently collapsed building and 2 dwellings, replacement of the garages. So basically, they wanted to build these couple of little flats in there for the employees who work on the land. Get this. The development has mitigation, okay? You have to. This is part of the agreement for the renovation of the buildings. 1. Details of the provision of electric vehicle charging points at the site. This is in a rural area. So even in a rural area, if you want to renovate somewhere, you're going to have to put in electric charging points for the vehicles They're not forcing you into having a useless car or anything, are they? Demonstration that freight traffic resulting from new development will not impact on European sites through routing arrangements. Now, we're talking about a couple of cars here. Can you see how draconian this is? This is an absolute attack on people living in the country. Provision of a personalised travel plan for incoming residents to the site. We're talking about a residential farm buildings here. A few people at the most are going to live there, and they want to know a personalised travel plan for incoming residents to the site. This is worse than what's happening in China. It's got to be. Maybe on a parallel with it. Let's say it's on a parallel with it. Details of the ability of all dwellings to connect to high-speed broadband, Internet of Things. There you go. These are part of the conditions for planning to renovate a couple of farm buildings. There you go. So if you've got any more on that, do send it in. Wandsworth, the other council that's now got this 20 million to spend on its climate emergency, said the news came in at tonight's full council meeting where councillors discussed the Climate Change Action Plan, which is the first big step in Wandsworth meeting its ambition to become Inner London's greenest borough and carbon neutral by 2030. Councillor Rory O'Brien, Cabinet Member for Finance and Corporate Resources, so you know who he is now, is leading the climate change work in Wandsworth. He said, "This investment demonstrates how seriously we are taking our work to tackle climate change and sustainability generally. Another pathetic word salad from another pathetic overpaid repeater." That's Rory O'Brien, BROIN, Cabinet Member for Finance and Corporate Resources in Wandsworth, South London. Take a note of that name. It is going to make a real difference to the delivery of our environment and sustainability strategy and will help fund a number of measures highlighted in the Climate Change Action Plan designed to reduce carbon emissions and tackle priority issues such as air quality. This will ultimately help to improve the lives of our residents and make Wandsworth a healthier and safer place to live. Another fine word salad of nonsense there. Worthy nonsense, all from the Sustainability Handbook. Sustainability is a business plan, as we know. As a starting point, the £20 million investment will fund measures around energy efficiency, air quality, urban greening, sustainable drainage, and transport and cycling initiatives. Has anybody had enough of cycling yet? No, you haven't, have you? The council has already made good progress with £5 million already spent on environmental schemes such as a comprehensive LED streetlight replacement programme, which is totally pointless, and the rollout of electric vehicle charging points. The Climate Action Plan also has a number of important targets, including increasing tree planting in the borough. Well, that's a good idea. Purchasing a low-emission fleet. Well, that's just the council wasting their money. As well, because remember that for most of the work they do, they need diesel vans. So they're liars as well. These people are just lying to you because it's been announced by other councils that they can't use electric vehicles for their fleet. It's just not practical. A key element of the council's work to tackle climate change is collaboration, and Wandsworth Council has already started working with residents, businesses and community groups in pushing forward its green ambition. Right, here we go. Community groups meaning these groups of useful idiots in your community hubs, making little pressure groups to make sure you go along with the controlled narrative. So pressure groups will arrive like mums for lungs. My children can't breathe on the way to work. All this school rather. Oh yeah, they don't go to work, do they? Because this is why I keep getting mixed up, because they're having climate strikes, but they're all too young to strike. I don't understand it. It's totally mad, isn't it? OK, so the useful idiot, Councillor O'Brien, said, "We are committed to working with the community in delivering our action plan and making a greener and more sustainable borough. With this £20 million investment, our residents can see that we are serious about making our ambition a reality." Oh, they're serious about it. And all the lobbyists are serious about lining their pockets on the back of you, taking what you've got. Another repeater. At the same time, the council published its 10-year environmental and sustainability strategy, which set out a roadmap for achieving this ambitious target and made a commitment that annual climate action plans would be developed and published, and that progress would be also reported annually. These actions include, yes, £5 million to projects which support the achievement of the Council's 2030 target, embedding environmental and sustainability aims across the Council. Basically, the aims of the World Bank, they're talking about here, environmental sustainability. By becoming a gold-level carbon-literate organisation, you couldn't make up how pathetic and childish and retarded these people are, could you? And introducing environmental commitments. Purchasing 100% green electricity. They're lying about that. You're never going to have 100% green electricity because only 2.9% of renewables is on the national grid. Out of 100%, 2.97%, I think that's at peak. And that's actually on the national grid, if you look up the national grid in real time. We already reported that the green energy agenda is entirely fake. The people who supply the national grid when it's at peak capacity are called AXA and Green Frog, AKSA, Turkish company, and Green Frog, a British umbrella company. They supply energy to the government at top prices. They're private companies, and they use, guess what, diesel generators buried all over the country. It's called a store system. They said to me, we don't know why the government is lying. So in other words, your local council's lying too. So all this stuff about purchasing 100% green energy, electricity, is a lie. It's an absolute, flat-out, barefaced lie. So go and confront them about it. See what happens. Moving to the next phase of engagement and communications plan that works, putting in partnership with residents, business and community groups, yes, your change agents, your useful idiots, your lobbyists who are going to be speaking on your behalf, by the way. They speak on your behalf, these people, and then you're going to have your citizens' assembly on climate change, where you're going to be pushed into agreeing to something on the back of a pack of lies. This report acknowledges that the action plans are only the starting point. Through real engagement with community groups, here we go again, residents and businesses, not residents or businesses, by the way, we've already seen that they're kept out of it. Only the useful idiot residents, of course, the lobbyists, and through additional dedicated resources, the Council will build on this plan with further actions developed and delivered over the next 10 years. I bet it will. This will include challenging everyone. Listen, excuse me a minute. This is an important bit. Listen to this. This will include challenging everyone who lives and works in Wandsworth to reduce their carbon footprint and make Wandsworth the greenest inner London borough. Well, they're all falling over themselves to rip you off, take your money, and destroy your way of life. So there you go. Just to finish off with a bit of comedy, as sea levels rise, this is from the New York Times and many other newspapers, as sea levels rise, scientists offer a bold idea, dam the North Sea. A proposal to build two huge barriers, one that would connect Norway to Scotland, the other France to England, was described as a warning about the urgency of the climate crisis. We're talking major retard here. London, one dam would stretch 300 miles from the coast of Scotland to Norway. The other, roughly 100 miles, would rise in the waters between northern France and southeastern England. Could you make this up? No. Together, the mammoth structures proposed by scientists would completely enclose the North Sea and offer protection for tens of millions of Europeans threatened by rising sea level caused by climate change. If you believe this, then I've got some lovely seafront property up for sale from the Al Gore estate in Switzerland. So, mission statement. We're going to have this now. If you want to start doing something about this, I'm going to put this on the website as well. Do look at the website and do join us on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. on Windows on the World. I've got some very interesting stuff to put out, very powerful stuff. Stories from people who have been contacting me for years. I'm going to have them on Wednesday. We're going to be taking apart a lot of the fake narratives and exposing a lot of the lies that are going on under the surface in Braindead Britain. Here's the mission statement. We are an unaffiliated group of local residents concerned about the lack of democratic process in local government planning and policy. We will remain unaffiliated as individuals acting collectively and within the law towards a truly inclusive democratic process where all voices are heard. That's what they say these citizens' assemblies are, which we know they're not. They're the end of that. So basically, use their language back at them, but enforce what they're meant to be doing. That's the point here. We are not affiliated with any group or organisation whatsoever. Very important. This does not mean that we do or do not endorse other groups. We do not agree with arriving at a consensus through being steered into predetermined outcomes by trained facilitators, either working for the council or public-private partnerships. That takes away your fake consensus in your citizens' assemblies, rolled out by Involve, which is funded by George Soros. No, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's on their very own website, involve.org, along with My Society and Sortition, are about to destroy Western democracy, which is the aim of, or help Western democracy fail. Because of the inevitable collapse of Western democracy, Extinction Rebellion lobbied the government, and that's one of their aims in their internal document. In the inevitable collapse of Western democracies, we are going to create sortition rising from the wreckage and create citizens' assemblies. So, all you idiots who lay down in Waitrose and did yoga on a bridge and basically made fools of yourselves, taking drugs and gluing yourself to things, well done. You are Braindead Britain. So, that's it for this week, and do listen on Wednesday, get in touch with any stories, and let me know if you've started up any action groups. That's it for now, and see you next Wednesday on windowsontheworld.net. So, good night from me, and see you soon. Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and programme stream at windowsontheworld.net.